What's going on, guys? Briar Rabbit here. So today I updated the BIOS on my gaming PC. It was a really old BIOS. The last time I had done it was in January. There were a ton of enhancements, including security fixes, microcode enhancements that just needed to be done on my gaming PC. And now this is the first time I've updated that BIOS since January, and the first time I'd done it since I delidded the CPU. Now, this computer is an i7-8700K with a delidded CPU on an Asus Maximus X Hero motherboard. So it's a pretty high-end system, and it's really just a gaming PC. If you watch my gaming channel or if you watch me stream on Twitch, then this is basically what I'm using as, it's almost a video game console, to be honest with you, because all I ever do with this thing is game. So I thought that this would be a good opportunity to try and see what kind of overclock I could come up with the delid. So I'm running much cooler temperatures ever since I delidded this processor. And I had kind of settled into a 5.0 gigahertz overclock pre-delid. And what was limiting that delid was really temperatures. I was getting into the 90s pretty quickly with that 5.0, and I just didn't feel good pushing it anymore. So I've always wondered, what's this actual chip capable of doing, and will the delid allow me to get there? So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna run this thing in its default configuration. Basically, how Asus ships the motherboard, running the 8700K, and do a couple of benchmarks. Not many, just a couple. We're gonna run Far Cry 5, their benchmark, see what it does. We're gonna run Cinebench, see what the score is there. Then we're going to put the 5.0 gigahertz overclock back in place. So all of that stuff has to be restored. Unfortunately, with the Asus motherboard, when you do a BIOS upgrade, when you put a new BIOS on the board, it kind of erases all of your settings, even your profiles, your overclocking profiles that you might have saved. So all of that stuff has to be put back in. Then we're going to try and overclock this PC as far as I can get it. I don't know what that is going to be yet because I've never really tried it with the delidded processor. Some people are able to get the 8700K up to 5.3. I think that's very rare. 5.2 I think is rare still. 5.1 though, I'm pretty suspicious that this PC can achieve that because really the only thing that was holding me back were temps, and temps aren't really a concern right now. So we're going to go ahead and run the computer in its default setup and see what these benchmarks say. Once we reboot into Windows, we'll run Cinebench, make sure everything's stable. Then we'll run a Far Cry 5 benchmark just to see what the frame rates look like. The reason I chose Far Cry 5 is because it runs pretty heavy on the CPU. And I just wanted a game that was easy to test because it has an in-game benchmark, and I wanted to see a game that runs pretty heavily on the CPU. So now that we booted back into Windows under default settings, we're going to run a couple of tests. I am going to start up CPU-Z so that I can monitor how much voltage is being supplied to the processor, and we'll start up hardware info as well to monitor temps. That startup screen kind of started up behind there. And we'll just scroll on down so we can see the temps here. And let's start off with Cinebench. Our first run of Far Cry 5, and you can see our minimum FPS is 90, our average FPS is 114, and our maximum FPS is 149. This is, again, stock. Exactly, if you just put together a computer with this processor and with this motherboard, this is exactly how it would run the first time you booted up Windows. So now let's put in our old 5 gigahertz overclock. Now we're back in the BIOS, and I've input my old overclock. It's 5.0 gigahertz, 1.35 volts. I think it's level 6 on the LLC. Very standard overclock for this motherboard and processor. We're going to go ahead and save that, boot into Windows, and see what kind of performance improvements we get. So we've run our tests with the 5.0 gigahertz overclock. This is basically what I was running before delidding. It's just running cooler now. And we came up with Far Cry scores of 109 frames per second minimum 136 average frames per second, and 170 maximum frames per second. So it's a pretty big upgrade over what the computer was running bone stock with no overclock applied to the processor. And I am running a 1080 Ti graphics card in this, so it does seem to help to overclock that processor to allow the frames per second to really breathe in this game. The Cinebench score was equally as impressive. It went from 1332 to 1531. So some interesting results here. 5.3 gigahertz was not stable at all, even at 1.45 volts. I could boot into Windows, but as soon as I ran any programs whatsoever, Windows crashed. It was out. 5.2, I could get stable at 1.45 volts. 1.44 volts, not stable. 1.45 volts, stable, at least for a couple of Cinebench runs. I decided that that was no good for me. 1.45 volts is just too much to run this computer at all the time, considering that it is very much my livelihood. This gaming PC, you know, when I Twitch stream, when I do YouTube videos, I do a lot of production based around the output of this computer, even though, you know, I have a Threadripper PC to do recordings on. It's recording what's coming out of this PC. So 1.45 volts, I just didn't like running it at that voltage for long term. So what I decided to do was try out 5.1 gigahertz. 5.1 gigahertz actually runs stable at 1.35 volts. Which is the same voltage that I was running at 5.0 pre-Delidded. So I was actually pretty surprised about that. Now, at 5.1, my temperatures are definitely a lot higher. I'm seeing max temps of 70 degrees on the cores and a max temp of 74 degrees on the CPU package. So it's definitely running warmer, but not hot by any means. A max temp of 74 degrees doesn't really bother me too much. So I'm very okay with that voltage. I'm very okay with those temperatures, and I'm getting 5.1 gigahertz. Now, the difference between 5.1 and 5.0 as far as performance goes, not a whole lot of difference here. So my Cinebench score for 5.1 was 1567. Compare that to 1531 on 5.0, and you're basically seeing nearly unmeasurable differences there. In Far Cry, I saw small differences again. My max was 170, my average was 138, and my minimum frames per second was 111. Compare that to 170, 136, and 109, and we're really talking about 2 to 3 frames. I think the max difference was 2 frames on both the minimum frame per second and the average frames per second. So running at 5.1, very, very slight difference than running at 5.0. Now, running at 5.0 compared to running stock was a huge difference. You know, we're talking 15% difference in performance in game, but very negligible difference running at 5.1 compared to 5.0. I may continue to tweak these settings. I may look at more settings to try and get those minimum FPSs up even further. But I think right now I'm just going to leave it at that 5.1 gigahertz overclock and just run with it because I'm very satisfied with the temps, the voltage, and the overclock. So that's going to do it for this one, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Hit that like button if you like the video. It really does help me out. Hit subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.